Have you been hearing people refer to Israel as an illegally occupied state, and you think they're just being anti-Semitic? Can I explain to you why it's being called that? So let's go back to 1917, when during World War I, talks were starting to happen between Ottoman Empire and Britain, that during the peace treaties, Britain would have control over the land of Palestine after the war. So once that discussion had been had, Balfour decided that in talks with the Zionists, that they would partition a part of Palestine for the Jewish homeland, a small portion. It was nothing legal. The Balfour Declaration is not a legally binding document. It is a statement of support that that's what Britain would do, that they would honor that. Unfortunately for them, after the war, the Treaty of Versailles, specifically the Covenant of the League of Nations, Article 22, starts to talk about self-determination for any British colonial entity, which now included Palestine, which means that the people of Palestine had the right to self-determination within their land. One land, one people, self-determination. That's what the Treaty of Versailles provided to all British colonies, now including Palestine. So that little agreement that Zionists had with Balfour was null and void. There was nothing legally binding about it, and there was nothing about it that actually prevented Palestinians from kicking them out if they wanted to. However, as we all know, that's not what happened. So even though legally Palestine should have had the right to self-determination, meaning they should have had control over their own land, Zionists moved in and eventually ended up with a very well-equipped military, but was really more controlled by terrorist groups. And that's not just my opinion. That's what they were called on the international stage throughout all of the 20s and 30s and 40s. For 30 years, from 1918 until 1948, the British Mandate of Palestine was terrorized by Lehi and Irgun, two of the major terrorist Zionist groups that over those decades committed hundreds of terrorist attacks within Palestine. Now, I think a lot of people misunderstand that. They think during this time it was like Palestinians, Arabs, which includes Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and Zionist Jews. But that's not the case. It was British mandated, meaning Britain soldiers were there. Britain military was in Palestine, protecting the land of Palestine and trying to keep Zionists into the small quadrant that they had been given. Commentary during those years suggests that the Palestinians as a whole believed in the integrity of the Allied powers to do ultimately what was just. It was also widely believed that their collective refusal to retaliate would prevent their tormentors from obfuscating the situation with claims of self-defense, which didn't work. However, the terrorist attacks that were committed were not just against Palestinians, although a large portion were. It was also against the military, the British military across the land. But that wasn't enough. Irgun blew up the house of a Jewish woman who refused to finance them, because it wasn't just Palestinians. It was also Jewish people who didn't support them that were also attacked. Zionist violence against uncooperative Jews continued with 4 attempted assassinations of Jewish civilians by the Zionist gangs recorded within a 10-day period in December 1946. And I know a lot of people say, well, it's the Arabs, it's the Palestinians, the indigenous Palestinians that didn't want peace, that didn't want to broker a deal that would allow them all to live peacefully. And to that, I just want to read you this. This is from Palestine Hijacked. In September of 1946, a new plan to end the carnage and the mandate was proposed in late September by a committee represented by 7 Arab states, the Arab League, and the British government, because those are the only people who had rights to that land at the time. It outlined a democratic Palestine with a government made up of Jews and Arabs of all religions, with both Arabs and Jews free to become head of state. Its authors were confident that the plan was consistent with international principles of self-determination. Lest the U.S. be unaware of it, Bevin personally handed U.S. Secretary of State Burns the proposals for a democratic state as set out by the Arabs. But Zionists rejected the plan outright, adamant that they would accept nothing less than a Jewish state in all of historic Palestine. And as talks of the partition came into play, Well, that really scared Zionists because, as we just heard, they wanted all of Palestine. They didn't only want a portion of it. When the ZOA, the Zionist organization, held its annual convention on October 26th, President Abba Silver categorically condemned any discussion of partition. Silver demands all of Palestine, as the New York Times headline put it, and he demanded an aggressive and militant line of action to get it. So ever more confident that partition would be imposed, the Jewish Agency expedited the establishment of new outposts in the Negev and southern Palestine and the Hula area in the north in order to secure regions that it predicted would lie on the Palestinian side. How did they do that? Through acts of terror. Now, when they wanted to branch out from Palestine to make sure that anyone who might actually vote for the partition and actually giving a piece of the land to Palestinians, well, they had to expand their reach. They started bombing Britain, home soil Britain, outside of Palestine as well, just to make their point. And they bragged about it. So Leahy, he said that Britain was issuing fake lists of casualties. We know for certain that on several occasions, the casualties suffered by the British were higher than those officially disclosed. They were bragging about how many British people they killed on British soil. And they weren't happy when those numbers were underreported. Again, terrorist organization. So Zionist bombings on the night of October 30th, 1946, with the bombing of the British embassy in Rome. And when America was starting to get a little bit apprehensive, they're like, I think this is a little beyond our reach. Like these people are willing to do anything and kill anyone in order to get what they want. They were starting to talk about maybe pulling back a bit. And this is what the Zionist organization said. Pressure the U.S. government to cancel its post-war loan to Britain unless it cedes to Zionist demands. So U.S. has been under the Zionist command for decades. It's no wonder that the current president of America boldly proclaims himself to be a Zionist, and that anyone who stands up against are being called terrorist organizations in America. Isn't that ironic that the actual groups that started all of this under Zionism that President Biden supports are the actual terrorist organizations that were called such by America, Britain, and every other country across the world, all through the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. So we come back to now end of World War II, where now it's international law for self-determination. And that really scared a lot of people. And as you can tell, Britain and America were under the thumb of Zionists. So they really quickly were like, let's just make it a state, because then at least we don't have to fight all of this. So partition, right, everything came into play, even though they fought against it, and they were given a small portion. By that point, they already had 78% of the land, not legally, because at no point in this had Zionists actually had any legal standing to take that land. This entire time, up until 1948, Palestine was the right to self-determination, and all the indigenous people of Palestine. Not the Israelis, not the Jewish people who'd come in, and certainly not the Zionists. And then they were just made a state. And not just made a state, they were then taken into the UN. After all this illegality and terrorism, they were accepted as the UN as a rightful state. However, most countries didn't believe that. And that's why we call it an illegally occupied state, because at no point has any legal proceedings actually taken place to allow Israel to be called a legal state. They stole it from Palestine with the help of America and Britain because they were terrified of Zionists who were controlling the world at that point. And clearly, still today. Interact, share, because you know this is going to get suppressed. Let's get the truth out there, folks.